start to get some readouts from inside the courtroom, hopefully here shortly. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. This is America Reports. The defense tried to tear the credibility of the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen. Trump's lawyer calling him, quote, "Hi guys, welcome back to XCOM 2, long more of the shows. It's Mod Jam Collection 2. Let's see here. Legal experts say they still are not sure what the underlying crime in this case is. One of the things we're going to look for the government is whether they will finally tell the world what's the crime that they think was committed.
How can we be in the middle of a summation and not know what the crime is that they're trying to conceal, or what crime they violated? What is the felony that resurrected these dead misdemeanors? It is unheard of.
Let's begin our panel live from outside the Trump courthouse. Shannon Rivers, our chief legal correspondent, Carrier Bob, Fox News legal editor, and Lydia Hu, Fox business reporter. So, Shannon, let's start with you. To the judge's point there, the prosecution is about to begin its closing arguments, and that is when we may finally hear, well, we don't know for sure, what the underlying crime in this case is.
Yeah, because John, as we've explained, and you've explained many times to our viewers, this was a misdemeanor charge that the statute of limitations would have run on, absent that it was supposedly pegged to an underlying crime, but we have not heard any clarity about what that underlying crime is. You've got to, in the jury instructions, tell people what they're looking for, what the elements, arguably, of that crime would be. You've got to give the jury direction, but we've yet to hear a clear, concise explanation of what that underlying crime is. And without that, this case goes away. Again, it would be a misdemeanor in which the statute of limitations had already run. So we got about 2.5 hours this morning from the defense, and our prosecution in this scenario goes last. They say expect 4 to 4.5 hours, so maybe we'll get it somewhere in there, John.
Okay, so Shannon, to Carrie now, Carrie, to a point that you made, that we have been quoting you many times, repeatedly, because it was a great one. And I'll just read it directly. You said if the government's going to try to imprison the former and possibly future president of the United States, it better be a slam dunk, clear-cut case with significant crimes or crimes committed in credible witnesses. This case, you say, and trial have been the opposite on all counts. Has anything you have seen and heard today changed that?
No, I think it's gotten worse. The fact that we're on the last day of this trial, hearing closing arguments, and we're all still trying to piece through what exactly the prosecution was attempting to do all this time is a really bad sign. This isn't just anyone. It's the United States, and as I said in a thing you read, it's quite possibly the future president. And then you combine that with the Biden presidency holding a pressure down here this morning, and then apparently Joe Biden is going to make an announcement when the verdict is reached. They're obviously using this as a shiny object today and tomorrow. Angles for media to run away from all of the bad news about Joe Biden, including the fact that his own people seem to be turning on him. But nonetheless, the fact that we're in a court of law, we're still figuring out what this crime is exactly is just troubling.
So Lydia, something happened just before the lunch break there, where Todd Blanchard, wrapping up his summation, said you cannot put the former president in prison based on the testimony of Michael Cohen. Rashawn did not take kindly to the suggestion that the former president could go to prison, thought that Blanche was trying to engender sympathy for his client. And now the prosecution apparently in there is seeking a remedy to that and one other piece. What's your take on what the jury would think of what Blanche said regarding putting the former president in prison? Because they could do that, even though the judge doesn't want that articulated in court.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the judge admonished Blanche when the jurors had been excused. You know, the judge did sustain that objection, so the jury's already instructed that they're not to consider any statements in which the judge has sustained an objection. So theoretically, the jurors should not consider that type of inflammatory remark. Because you're right, that is actually the very question that they've now been engaged hearing their testimony on, which is whether President Trump has in fact, guilty of falsifying records. And I think that really, that moment, I think was the prosecution's attempt to push back on what was otherwise a pretty compelling presentation from Todd Blanche throughout the morning. Todd Blanche did an excellent job setting off his remarks of the day, making this case actually very simple, reminding the jurors that this is about alleged falsified documents and reminding them of the evidence that actually shows that the documents perhaps were not falsified at all. This whether the payments were constructed in such a way in 2017 to conceal the non-disclosure payment that was made to Scooby in 2016 and the budget issue, whether Michael Cohen lied about whether or not he was performing legal services in 2017, such that the documentation showing he was getting paid for legal services in 2017 was a lie. And we heard from Michael Cohen's own testimony that he was President Trump's personal attorney. So I think if the jury focuses on that, as Todd Blanche suggests, they could very likely have reasonable doubt as to whether they think President Trump is guilty just based on the simple issues of the documents case, which is really what Blanche was effectively reminding them through the start of his closing remarks today, John.
Okay, so Shannon, we are getting some updates out of the courtroom right now, including one from our producer inside the room. They're getting the jury now, so we do believe that things will be back underway here shortly. Shannon, I'll ask you what this means. I know it's probably hard for you to access some of the readouts that we're getting. But this one says the prosecution has provided the judge with a proposed curative instruction on Blanche's comments. They also asked for an instruction on retainer agreement, saying the defense misstated the law. The defense then objected to an instruction on the retainer agreement, but not to Blanche's comments on punishment. The judge will not give the instruction on retainer agreements from the bench. And that's when we were told they were bringing the jury into the courtroom. Your thoughts on that and anything else that you're seeing?
Yeah, so what happened is they did have that fight going into lunchtime, and that was still being cleaned up before the jury comes back now to hear the prosecution's 4.5-hour summation of its own. And there were things that Blanche said in front of the jury that they weren't struck with, that they want the judge to instruct, otherwise jurors don't take this into account or don't listen to this, or this was misstated. And like the judge said from the beginning, he said, they're about the facts and evidence, these attorneys when they talk to you, but I'm about the law. And this goes back to those all-important jury instructions that he's eventually going to hand to the jury, too. He's the prism through which they will see this case. He tells them what the law is, how to apply it to what they've heard in this courtroom, and he doesn't want the attorneys doing any of that, instructing them on the law. So prosecution is arguing that he got something wrong about the retainer agreement, about something in the laws at that point. So that's what they're trying to clean up before the jury comes back in. There weren't a ton of objections during the defense's presentation. Like now you're going to get double the time with the prosecution, so it'll be interesting to see what the defense has to say. There are all kinds of things that they object to that have been allowed in conversations about that non-prosecution agreement with David Pecker, the guilty pleas for Michael Cohen, and again, those aren't supposed to be quoted. The jury is not supposed to consider those in light of finding Trump guilty of anything. And even though you can tell the jury that and give them that instruction, we're human beings, and somewhere that information has lodged in there. Oh, other people did have guilty pleas or something connected to this was not clean and above board. So there'll be a lot of instructions to the jury, but they're all going to come through the judge's prism.
All right, well, there is an instruction that was just read to the jury, and that was over Blanche's comment that you can't put the former president in prison based on the testimony of Michael Cohen. Jonathan says the jury is seated. The judge is reading the instruction to cure the mistake of Blanche's closing in asking the jury not to send Trump to prison. The judge is saying that it's his responsibility and not the jury's to determine punishment. Trey Gabby's got a thought on that. He says the curative instruction on prison only serves to bring more attention to it. Just because you're entitled to a curative instruction doesn't mean you should take it. These cases. To Kerry, this morning in his closing arguments, Blanche went into great detail about why there was no intent on Trump's part to defraud. You've got some thoughts on that?
Now, this is a very important part of his argument. He started with saying, look, one, the way these expenses were classified in the ledger record, as Lydia mentioned, they're not false. Legal expenses paid to a personal attorney couldn't be characterized as legal expenses. But two, if you don't think that's true and you think they should have been called something else, well, Donald Trump, one, would have needed to intend to defraud somebody or something by putting those in the book, and he would have had to acknowledge about that. Now, first, it's not entirely clear if Trump even knew how these expenses were classified in that book. So the jury would have to get over that hurdle. But secondly, the intent to defraud aspect is very interesting because, again, we're dealing with another vague law in New York State on the books. Similar to the law at issue in a civil fraud trial where the law had never been applied against Donald Trump in the way that it was, where there doesn't need to be a victim. The banks were happy, but as we remember, that was a victimless crime. Similar here, there doesn't need to be someone who is, say, deprived of property or money or anything. So then the question becomes, okay, if they don't think, the jury does not think that these expenses should have been classified as legal expenses, then who was Donald Trump trying to defraud? Because this is part of an internal book. And I think what the prosecution is attempting to get across the finish line is that he was essentially defrauding the American people by not allowing them to know about the Stormy Daniels perfectly legal NDA. Now, again, how that would have even been an issue in an internal book at Trump Tower is still unclear to me. But two, think about this for a second. The fact that a politician can be found guilty, effectively, of intending to defraud the American people for not revealing something, well, what then happens with all of the people who made campaign promises like, I promise to lower your taxes, and then what do you know? They don't. Would I then have grounds to go to my local prosecutor's office and say, hey, you know what, he or she didn't fulfill that campaign promise, I feel defrauded, are you guys going to bring criminal charges? So that's another thing at play in this whole case. It just makes this really challenging to follow.
Lydia, I want to get your thoughts on brand new readouts coming from the courtroom right now. Trey Gowdy noting there wasn't much warm up, there was generalities, and the prosecution started right into the elements of the offense in the closing. The prosecution then began by telling the jury to tune out the noise. He insisted that they had presented, quote, powerful evidence of the defendant's guilt. He is starting by showing the sideshows of the defense, meaning responding to what we just heard from the defense's closing arguments, to which Trey Gowdy noted that prosecution is taking the bait early of reacting to the defense's closing. Andy McCarthy is noting it is not good for the defense that the first thing the jury is told is that Blanche's argument about going to prison was improper, also by telling the jury that a sense of incarceration is not necessary in this case. The judge may make conviction more likely, psychologically easier for jurors to convict if they believe the defendant won't have to go to prison. Lydia.
Good to go.
Wow, I'm really taken by what you said right off the top there. I ignored the noise because right away I'm wondering what noise does the prosecution think the jury has been exposed to, particularly after they were just sent home for an entire week before these closing arguments are starting to get underway around friends and around family, presumably around the Memorial Day holiday, having who knows what types of conversations about what their experience may or may not have been like as they're serving on this jury. Sure, they are anonymous to us, but they may no longer be anonymous to one another. And one has to wonder how anonymous they are to their friends and family when they've been seemingly absent from work or home life for 5 or 6 weeks during this process has been playing out. So I wonder if that isn't really an ask for them to ignore what information they may have been exposed to throughout the duration of this trial. And a lot of the questions, the intense question about what is this case really about, and the strength and the merits of the legal claims that have been brought forth against the former president. And I think that is true. I would agree with Andy McCarthy that it seems like this whole issue about sending the former president to prison, not a good way to start off the closing arguments, because they're right. The jury is not intended to decide the penalty for any alleged conviction. They are only here to decide what facts have been established during the duration of this trial, and applying that to the law as Judge Rochon will explain it. And we expect that process to happen tomorrow. The prosecution, we've been told by the prosecuting attorneys, they expect their closing arguments to last 4 to 4.5 hours. That is quite a marathon session that should take us well through the 6 p.m. hour, maybe they're approaching 7 if they stay on schedule, and that's maybe not even accounting for any breaks. So can the jurors even stay attuned and pay attention to closing arguments that are that lengthy after a long day of them? I think that remains to be seen as well, and it's potentially a challenge for the prosecutors there too.
All right, Lydia, Gary, Shannon, great analysis. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Ladies from the courtroom, the prosecution now, Sandra, is zoning in on phone calls that may or may not have been made by Michael Cohen, going through a long list of phone records and various permutations and combinations for how calls could have been made without being logged. Andy McCarthy suggesting that prosecutions get bogged down in detail here. instead of making its big closing argument. We'll see how they proceed with that.
Well, to Lydia's point, and Andy's note, saying that it's ought to be starting by explaining a flow chart. It's the beginning of the argument.
Excellent.
It's at the beginning of the argument that an advocate has the jury's complete attention. You need to use that to tell them something important. Don't start by telling them you want to address a bunch of things that aren't important or are misdirections. By the time you get to the point, you may have lost the jury's attention. This is Andy McCarthy. All right, this is happening. We are monitoring the latest on that program. Mark Eilish is back. Mercedes Kohler are going to do this live.
I know this might seem like a blue, but I agree with it.
Total faith in our ability to overcome any and all threats to our
Lord, you know what's on our hearts. You know where we struggle. You know where we need to be pushed. Help us, the good, the bad.
Pause the Acorn stairlift. Just don't fall. Sit, relax, ride. Acorn stairlift, the world's leader in stairlifts. Don't let limited mobility keep you from going down your stairs, even outside. Call Acorn stairlifts now for a free information kit and no obligation quote. Why risk falling when you can safely ride?
All right.
And then there's an added seat and backrest. He says, stop the chair if there are obstacles. The seat swivels and twist your body. The Acorn stairlift pulls away and during power outages. It's surprised at how quickly. 800-709-4205. Free information kit or visit our website. 800-709-4205. From Paultown, here there's a silver shortage. Wall Street predicts the silver shortage could cause a price spike. Listen to this. So that silver shortage we've been predicting for such a long time is finally here. Solar and electric cars are using up all the metal that is out there, and that's all. And that's going to spike the silver price in the next couple of years.
I used to own just gold. Now I also own silver. Why should you consider silver? Find out at the Silver Shortage Report, and my trusted friends at Near Capital will send it to you for free. Here's who I trust whenever I buy silver. Get the free Silver Shortage Report and see why experts believe silver prices are set to soar. Near Capital, over 25 years in business, thousands of 5-star reviews, and a 24-hour risk-free purchase guarantee. When you call, you can get up to $15,000 in gold and silver. Call 800-654-1010. 800-654-1010. Get ready.
This story has
No filter. I'll go get her. I gotta stop. That is such an inflammatory statement. Goodbye. Call me on Thursdays too.
Setting course for Western Europe.
closing arguments for the New York versus Trump criminal trial are back underway. And Mark Eilish is running now. Cohen is a trial attorney, and we're happy to have him back. I'm just going to read you directly from the attorney's name here. There's a lot happening inside that courtroom. He says it's hard to see how a juror would buy the argument that Daniels is not discredited and should not be demonized. Study class that admits the prosecution that admits that some of her testimony but still kind of rings true. The kind of testimony he says that you would expect people to remember. And it's clear that despite the regrets of the judge, the prosecutors were perfectly happy with these salacious details. Mark, your response.
All right, you just raised a lot of issues. First of all, I don't think Stormy Daniels is a major player in this case. In that, all right, yeah, I had an affair with her, or he didn't have this testimony. Did he wear a condom? Was he very confident? There, that all came up in a round around. He should have. And who's to blame for that? I don't think it's this judge. Everyone wants to blame this judge, and I think the world is details to come in. But as the judge explained, the minute the defense challenged whether the affair occurred or not, that's when the door got opened to a lot of the detail, because the defense is saying it didn't happen, so I didn't prove it with detail. So I don't necessarily blame the judge, but I can tell you that stuff should not have come into evidence in this case.
All right, so Mercedes, speak to this, because we're getting notes from three very astute contributors: Jonathan Turley, Trey Gowdy, and Andy McCarthy, who are all on the overflow room listening to all of this. They point out that the way that the prosecution began its closing arguments is very curious. That they rebutted the defense on Tom Blanch's assertion that the jury could be sending the former president, to jail. He then got into a bunch of heavy phone data. Then tried to make the point that Stormy Daniels was not trying to extort the former president, despite trying to get as much money as she possibly could. And then Trey Gowdy says making Stormy Daniels a victim is a heavy lift, questioning why the prosecution would even take that approach. Your thoughts?
Eastern Europe.
Well, it's interesting because when I do closing arguments on the second to go, I generally do rebut the other side right off the bat. And when I take it right off the table, I don't want
retaliation
in any way. Well, I don't blame the prosecution for taking that approach. With respect to Stormy Daniels, it's exactly what Mark said. Once the door was open, it had to be closed with testimony, and yes, it was cringeworthy. Probably didn't meet all the particulars, but she felt, Stormy Daniels felt, this was her day in court. This is her day to say this happened. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what Stormy Daniels said. Whether or not they had an affair, did have an affair, there was an NDA, it could have been stipulated to that effect, and that's what the defense said during the closing argument. He said the NDA, and it could have been stipulated. Stormy Daniels said he meant to testify. The fact she did testify, that's really inconsequential. Let's move on and let's focus on what's really here. And let's focus on the key issues with Michael Cohen trustworthy. Is he someone that you should believe? He is the only person that says that Donald J. Trump was guilty of any crimes.
Okay, so Mark, it seems Trey Gowdy is really struck by the prosecution spending so much time responding directly to the defense closing arguments. In fact, he just sent out a note from inside the courtroom with references to the defense closing. Did the prosecution have its closing prepared ahead of time? He's asking. I just don't understand how this closing is structured, where it began, how it began, what is being discussed first. He then writes this: prosecution is now trying to mitigate the damage of Cohen. Prosecution agrees Cohen is biased, with 5 exclamation marks. Mark.
Okay, so that's a positive thing the prosecutors did. For them to try to make him out to be the Mother Teresa of the courtroom would be a foolish thing. They have to concede that he's got issues. I love, though, when I'm on the defense side and I'm raising issues in my closing, and then the first thing the prosecutor does is spend their time dealing with my issues. That's a good thing if you're on Team Trump. The prosecutor's not focusing on their case right now. They're so concerned about what I said, and then, it's, well, they're saying one thing, we're saying another. Who bears the burden of proof in this case? They do. So if jurors aren't sure on key issues, like the credibility of Cohen, then who suffers? Not the defense. It's not maybe Trump did it. Probably he did it. It's proof beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, and prosecutors bear that burden.
So just one more note, just as we bid you adieu here. This one coming from Jonathan Charlie. Steinglass insists that Michael Cohen is understandably angry because he is, quote, the only person to pay the price for this conspiracy. Professor Charlie notes that this reinforces the false impression that a federal election violation occurred in this case. The defense finally objected, but the judge overruled, and this was precisely what Mershon said that the prosecutors could not do. So once again, like the strike zone is a lot larger for the prosecution here than it is for the defense. Mark, Mercedes, as always, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks. All right, real treat for you. Steve Hilton and Leo Terrell on deck. They are next with their thoughts about what's happening.
Life, diabetes, there's no slowing down. Each day is a unique blend of people to see and things to do. That's why you choose Glucerna to help manage blood sugar response. Uniquely designed with carb steady. Glucerna, bring on the day.
Feeling from a backed up gut? Relax works naturally with the water in your body to help you go. Free your gut and your mood will follow. For 8 grams of fiber from Neurofiber gummies. 20 seconds a week to lose 20% of your weight in a year with diet and exercise. That's the power of GLP-1s through Ro. Connect with a provider today at ro.co/Pro. Only Purple's Gel Flex Grip passes the rotting test. No other mattress creates your body as simultaneously supports your spine. Memory foam doesn't come close. Get your best sleep guaranteed. Save up to $800 during our Memorial Day sale. Visit purple.com or a store near you.
Still trying to find a cheaper price for that hotel?
I'm so close.
Just use Trivago. Trivago compares wholesale prices from hundreds of sites instantly.
Well, we could save $50 a night.
Hotel Trivago.
As the candidates race toward the White House, America hopes for a clean and fair election. But kids understand what that means. It's why my team created the Kids Guide to the Presidential Election. Get it at freeelectionguide.com. That's freeelectionguide.com.
Hi, Grandma. I played baseball today. Oh, that's great.
What position did you play?
First base. That's a great grandpa used to play. In our hearing, it wouldn't allow us to use a regular phone. It made us feel isolated.
It became difficult to communicate with our friends.
Clear captions was an easy solution for us.
Clear Captions provides captions on a phone, like captioning on your TV, so you can see what the caller is saying live as they say it.
Making it easy to understand and respond immediately.
There is no insurance or Medicare required. Clear Caption service is provided at no cost to you through a federally funded program. We deliver, install, and train you on how to use your phone, all at no cost to you.
Give your loved ones the independence and connection they deserve.
Call now to see if you qualify to get a Clear Captions phone at no cost to you. Call 1-800-979-0270. That's 1-800-979-0270. Did you hear? A secret hoard of 1881 $5 gold Liberty coins have been found. These gorgeous 1881 gold coins are as bright and shiny as the day they were struck, and less than 200 of these gold coins are available. Coin experts are calling the secret.
This will save. Seems a little weird.
Opportunity, and you go on a piece of the hoard. When you call, you are guaranteed an 1881.
I'll see you next time, alright? Peace.
You must call now. These 1881 dated gold coins are still in uncirculated condition with brilliant luster that has 143 years of history you can hold in your hand. To learn more, call 1-800-777-9